we need to change the culture and expectation around what it means to be a quote unquote good student. There's all this talk about self-care, take care of yourself. But what are we actually doing to encourage students to take care of themselves?
Dave Bolger here, and welcome to Had I Known, a show that explores the journeys of some of the most interesting members of the Hamilton College community. This week's guest is Saphire Ruiz, class of 2022. All right, back from vacation. Hope you didn't miss the show too much. Hopefully you used it as a chance, as I had asked, to get caught up on the shows you missed. Did you do that? What'd you think? Who's your favorite one? Well, it's good to be back. It's good to take a break. Good to recharge a little bit. It's important to take a break every once in a while, so hopefully you didn't get too mad at me for missing a week. This idea of taking a break and unplugging and recharging is something that comes up later in this conversation with this week's guest, Saphire Ruiz. I thought it would be good to check in with a current student, get a sense for what's going on campus. And what better place to start than the student elected to represent all students, the Student Assembly President. I first became aware of Saphire when I came across the State of the College address they gave a few months ago. And in that address, Saphire was highly critical of the administration. So I thought it would be interesting to chat with them to get a sense for what the students are feeling and experiencing on campus today. Clearly, activism is alive and well on campus, and it seems like Saphire is going to make sure that it stays that way. Here is my conversation with Saphire Ruiz, class of 2022.
Yeah.
How you doing?
I'm good, trying to survive the end of the semester.
Right. And when you and I spoke on the phone, you were in Philadelphia. Are you still in Philadelphia?
Mm-hmm.
How's that going for you?
It's good. Yeah, I'm out here for a couple more months and then back to campus.
And what drew you to, why Philadelphia as the destination for your COVID hibernation?
Yeah, I'm here with a couple of friends, and so part of it was just a matter of we were all in different states, and so it was a matter of just okay, what's the easiest for all of us to not have to drive, a significant amount of time away.
Yeah.
And then of course, rent prices, thinking about, COVID guidelines in each state and the rates in each state, because this was back in December. So it was everything was still pretty high. There wasn't a vaccination out yet or anything like that.
Right.
So yeah, a couple different things, but Philadelphia kind of was the best option for us.
Philly's a cool city.
Yeah.
Have you gotten to enjoy any of it, or you've been holed up?
Not a whole lot.
Yeah.
Enjoying it a little bit more now that it's getting warmer out and folks are starting to get vaccinated. My entire house is either fully vaccinated or halfway to being fully vaccinated. So that's really nice.
That's good.
So there are going to be more chances for us to really start to explore everything.
Just as your time is wrapping up, you can actually enjoy some of it.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. So it was kind of like a unplanned or unsanctioned semester away, right?
Yeah. It's funny because I was supposed to be abroad for the entire year. So the very act of not being on campus all year is something that, I was already planning to do, but obviously not at all in this case because I was on medical leave my during the fall. So I haven't been on campus since last March.
Okay. Where were you intending to go if the world was normal?
I was supposed to be in the Dominican Republic for the fall and Copenhagen for the spring.
Oh, wow. That would have been fun.
Yeah, would have been great.
Sorry. I mean, I've talked about it before on the show with folks, but just all of the things that those of us who had gone to school in a different time take for granted now that are part of the college experience have been completely ripped away from you all. And I can't begin to imagine what it's like having to deal with that. I mean, I think, kudos to you for making the best of it and say, hey, we'll grab up some friends and go to Philadelphia and do something with it. But
Yeah.
um, the plan is to be back on campus for next year, I assume.
Yeah, I just got accepted for a senior fellowship, which means I'm going to be spending the entire year doing research, and I need access to the archives. So, and also Hamilton just announced that we're going to be all on campus in the fall. So,
Well, congratulations.
thank you.
You looking forward to that?
I am. Yeah, it's been a project that first started to come up for me in my freshman year. And it's gone through a couple different iterations, and I was considering doing summer research for it, and then I was considering a thesis, and then my Posse mentor, because I'm a Posse Boston scholar, suggested that I look into doing a senior fellowship. And so I put my application in earlier this month, and I think last week, time is a little bit all over the place now, but I think last week I got the official confirmation that I would be doing it.
Well, that's awesome. What are you going to be researching?
So I'm looking into tracking and historicizing activist movements at Hamilton, specifically looking at three movements: the anti-apartheid South African movements in the 70s and 80s, the Social Justice Initiative in 2009 and 2010, which led to the creation of the Days Masolo Center, and then an anonymous movement called The Movement that was around in like 2015 and 2016. And so I'm looking specifically at how in those movements, the activists, I'm looking specifically at women and gender variant activists of color, how they created space like physical spaces and communities, and led to policy change through their work, and also how they the college responded to their work, and different other community members like alumni and staff and faculty and others, other students responded to their work, and just kind of, I think Hamilton has a very rich history of activism. And from what I've seen, there aren't a lot of archives or like written stories of that. And so I think right now, I think a lot of different folks are doing this work in a lot of different ways. I know that there are faculty members who are working on stuff like this. There's a professor in the Women's Studies department who's looking at, I forgot the official name of the project, but I worked on it a little bit with her in her methodologies class, where she's looking at the history of LGBTQ plus students at Hamilton and Kirkland. I know the Days Masolo Center right now is archiving all of their files and trying to get more about the history of the DMC and the orgs that have been considered with the DMC. And so I think right now we're going through a process where there's a lot more interest in the parts of Hamilton and also partly Kirkland, that we don't really have a lot of record on right now. And people are trying to do that record keeping. And so trying to be part of that process and looking at these three specific movements.
Why those three?
Because I was originally looking at like activism in general, but that's way too broad and would take way too long. It would be a multi-year process.
Sure.
And I chose those three because I think that they have the most tangible policy results, specifically with SJI, obviously, because that led to the DMC. Mm-hmm. And it was also happening around the same time as, I know the movement, I think, was happening around the same time as the SSIH requirements, which is like, part of the academic curriculum now. It's a big part of the academic curriculum. So I chose those three movements because they seemed to have the most prominent amount of change on campus. The anti-apartheid, led eventually to the resignation of a president. And so, I felt like those were the most prominent ones and have probably had like the biggest impact on Hamilton's history in the last, 20, 30 years. So, yeah.
That's really interesting. Two questions, I guess, on that. One is there a going-in hypothesis that you're looking to prove as you uncover what activism looked like in those three different eras? And then also, what do you hope to do with this archiving and shedding light to this? Talk to me about that a little bit.
Yeah. I guess in terms of the first question about hypotheses, I have connections with folks in the Social Justice Initiative and the movement already. And so even before, I thought of this idea, and speaking with them, I know specifically with regards to how the college and how other community members responded. I know that they faced a lot of backlash and that it was very difficult for them to actually make these policy changes happen. I know that there's an issue of, their policy, the policy that they were pushing for. What ended up happening was much more watered down versions of what they wanted. I know that with SJI in particular, there's the issue of like having their history erased. And it isn't until very recently that the DMC has been making a more active attempt at like making sure that that story is known and making sure that people know that the DMC was created out of this activism that occurred.
And the DMC, that's the Days Masola Center.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Good.
And it also comes out of my own, this hypothesis that, that's going to be a running theme throughout all the interviews that I have and the research that I do is also comes out of my own experiences in doing this work at Hamilton. And, I'm a junior.
Well, we're going to get there. There.
I'm a junior, been here almost 3 years. I got involved the moment I arrived to campus starting with the Women's Center. I joined the general board of the Women's Center like a month, probably maybe less than a month on my arriving to campus. And by my spring freshman year, I was on the executive boards of 3 organizations. So I've been deeply involved in Hamilton's activist work and activist scene in my time here. And what I have found is also a lot of pushback and a lot of targeting from kind of all sides of it. Both, having, disagreements with members of senior staff and also like, there's a new anonymous app called Jodel that's been causing a lot of issues for the past year and facing a lot of targeting on that. And I've had to like submit so many anti-bias incident reports or bias incidents reports because of people targeting my race and my gender. And, so it's also just knowing from personal experience and also from the experiences like my friends and stuff that, it's very difficult to actually advocate for this change and especially when you are very explicitly challenging and critiquing the institution, there's a lot of pushback. And when you have things that are really huge, like SJI and the anti-apartheid movements and the movement, I can imagine the pushback that was gained and the isolation that comes from doing this kind of work.
Seems like there's an opportunity as you do this work to shed light and inspire future students when they walk on campus to understand that there is a history of that. I'm curious as you go through this research and start to uncover insights about what it was like in these various periods. I know you're not doing the entire timeline of the history of Hamilton College, but what kind of ebb and flow there was with activism, because I'm sure there was that. And I lived through that in the mid to late 90s when I was there. Early on, activism on campus was the students railing against the administration because of the decision to take away fraternity houses and changing the social life on campus. Not exactly social justice warriors when you're picketing the trustees about give me back my fraternity house or give us places to party. It did pivot into a certain area when we did start to reckon with some challenges around hate on campus and the way in which particularly gay and lesbian students were treated at the time. And that raised up a little bit towards the end of our time there. But I sense that given what's going on in the country and the work you're doing, it's a much different environment than when I was there in the mid to late 90s. And I'm curious as you go through this to see what kind of ebbs and flows you find in the history of the school and the student body.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely exists, and it definitely, I think, does correspond with what's happening in the country at large. I know from speaking to seniors, class of 2019, when I first entered Hamilton, that 2016 obviously was a really big year. There was a lot of activism around that. That was also the last time that the movement was active. So obviously, the rise of Donald Trump led to a lot of that activism. And then from there, it fell off. And I know in my freshman year, which was from 2018 to 2019, I had a lot of frustration in that there wasn't a lot of work going on. And this is actually partly like what started to lead me to this idea that I was part of the Black and Latinx Student Union and the Feminists of Color Collective at a Women's Center in my freshman year. And I was going through some of their old like posters and photos and stuff, and like just seeing like the work that they were doing and also the communities that they had. And it was very clear to me that they had a very rich history of all of this. And at the time, I wasn't seeing that anywhere in my freshman year. And that started to change in my sophomore year with the onset of, there was the climate justice movement and call for divestment from fossil fuels restarted again, because I was active in 2014. And so it came back in 2019. And then, of course, the pandemic happened. And with that came the summer protests with George Floyd. I also know for myself, when they terminated Posse Boston in 2018, May of 2018, that led to, in my freshman year in February of 2019, a resurgence of activism around that. And I was part of that. And so I would say for myself, I think in my first year, there wasn't really a lot happening, and things were very dead on campus, and there wasn't a lot of movement happening. And then, it started up a little bit when Posse started to get involved, and we started to advocate for ourselves and for the ways that we were being treated in the spring of 2019. And then from there, in the fall of 2019, you had the climate justice movement resurging. And then in the spring of 2020, there was Posse again, still climate justice stuff going on. And then there was a bunch of racial justice stuff going on. I think since then, there's been just generally a resurgence. Also in my spring 2019, there was a rally on campus because some women were getting drugged down the hill. And so there was a rally against date rape drugs. So I would say like it in my freshman fall, there was like nothing going on. In my freshman spring, it started to pick up again. And then by my sophomore year was when it really started to pick up. And there's been a little bit of a downturn in the last few months, just because everyone's really exhausted. But I think generally speaking, it's definitely improved significantly since I got here. And there are lots of different pockets of people doing a lot of different work. So I there's definitely ebbs and flows, and obviously they relate significantly to what's going on in the world.
Right. But I'm curious, before you got to school, was that activist spirit alive in you, or was it awoken at Hamilton?
Definitely I was able to explore it more at Hamilton, because in high school I had a lot of family responsibilities that made it difficult to like fully engage. But I've been engaged in this work since, I would say, started to get into it my freshman year of high school. And then by my sophomore year, I was engaged. And by my senior year, I was in a program with YW Boston called the Youth Leadership Initiative, which was all about like social justice education. And I had like a community action project that I had to do. So like myself and a couple of my classmates like did some education around classism and class consciousness and class analyses. I was the president of my school's feminist club and the Rainbow Alliance, which was like the LGBTQ plus club. And then, of course, just doing my own like education and research and stuff like that. And most of my friends were involved in some way, shape, or form. So definitely, I've been involved in this work in some degree since at least sophomore year of high school. But being at Hamilton and no longer having those family responsibilities to the same extent definitely allowed me to expand upon my work and really like start to delve into it in a way that I wasn't able to before.
And where was high school? You mentioned Boston. Where in Boston did you grow up?
Yeah, so I grew up primarily in Dorchester. I moved around a little bit, but that's primarily where I've been. That's where I've been for the last 11 years now, going on 12. I went to Boston Latin Academy, which is a public exam school in Boston.
Good school.
I went, sorry, excuse me.
I said, good school.
It was a really great school. It was like my top choice. So I was really glad to get in. And I was there from 7th grade to 12th grade. So it was very prominent in my, I guess, in building my consciousness and understanding of the world, because I had really great teachers that definitely like pushed my limits and challenged me in really great ways. And I'm very grateful to that school. I think that there are a lot of teachers there that care very deeply about the world and instilled that in me and did what they could to teach me about, what justice looks like and what liberation looks like. So I very much credit my middle school and high school teachers to the way that I've learned to understand the world, and also, obviously, being able to get to Hamilton and advocate for myself in the ways that I have been able to at Hamilton.
How did you end up at Hamilton?
It's kind of a funny story in that I discovered Hamilton in my sophomore year of high school. I was looking through like one of those really big college books, and it was a little bit of a joke when I first saw Hamilton's name, because at the time I really liked the Hamilton musical. And so I kind of I took a picture of it and I sent it to my friends, and I'm like, haha, this is where I'm going. But I also did mark down the school, because at the time I was looking for private liberal arts schools in the Northeast, but not in Massachusetts, because I knew that I didn't want to go to school in Massachusetts. And Hamilton obviously falls within that. And then from there, it was just it was one of those situations where you learn about something, or you hear about something, or you buy a new car and suddenly you see it everywhere.
Sure. Yeah.
Suddenly it was just everywhere. I worked at the Museum of Fine Arts that summer, and they had some college interns come in, and one of them was a Hamilton student, and they were talking about Hamilton. And that was when I discovered the Posse Scholar program. And then from there, it was just everywhere. And suddenly I was just seeing Hamilton everywhere, and I was learning about it everywhere. And by the time my summer before junior year, by the time it was the end of my summer before junior year, I had decided that it was my top choice, and it was where I wanted to go. A large part of that was because of the open curriculum. I'm a huge, huge, huge believer in letting students take as much initiative as possible in their educational journey. Really, really against core curriculum and standardized testing and all of that. And so I was really interested specifically in that. But also part of it was just a gut feeling. It's really cheesy. I compare it to when I decided to go to Boston Latin Academy, because I had actually gotten into Boston Latin School, which is the top public exam school at Boston, but I chose to go to Boston Latin Academy because of a gut feeling. And I was kind of getting the same feeling about Hamilton. So I was okay, I feel like this is where I need to be. And so then it ended up being the only school that I applied to, and I went through the Posse program. And so I got accepted in December of 2017. And I sometimes I think back to the night that I got accepted, because I was the Posse process is a 3-month long process. So I was going back and forth into interviews from September until December. And it wasn't until the very last interview that I actually got nervous. It was oh crap, I don't know what I'm going to do if I don't get into this college. And it was when I really realized oh wow, this is where I want to go. I do not know what I'm going to do with my life if I don't get into Hamilton. And then I got in, and that was really great. And yeah.
I totally get the just gut feeling. Yeah. One of the things my mom had always told me about choosing a school, choosing where to work, where to live, is always, can you see yourself there? Right? She's always asked yourself, can you see yourself there? And does it feel like home, or does it feel like going to be? And that was very much a feeling I had when I was looking at Hamilton as well. So I totally get it. When you arrived on campus, did that feeling hold? And did you feel like it was what it was cracked up to be?
It held for maybe 2 weeks. I had a really great orientation experience. I very distinctly remember before classes starting, there is this one really great memory I have of being with my entire posse in diner, and it was really nice out, and we were all joking around and laughing around, and the jukebox was playing, and one of my posse members was dancing around, and I every year Snapchat reminds me of the memory, and it's always really great to see it. Unfortunately, less than 3 weeks onto campus, my friend and I got called a racial slur by someone who was passing by on College Hill Road. Yeah, so it was kind of immediately, I think that was definitely a wake up call moment. And I think it was the first time that I started to understand what it meant to go to a predominantly white institution in this really isolated place that's surrounded by predominantly white towns, especially as someone who's never left Boston. My high school was almost 50% Black and brown. So this was an entirely new experience to me. And it was in that moment that I was kind of oof, yeah, this is where I'm at right now. And yeah, I would say from there, it just kind of went downhill a little bit. And by the time, we were at November and going for Thanksgiving break, my freshman fall, like I was considering transferring because it was an incredible culture shock being a Black person at a college like Hamilton and just like constantly feeling ignored and unheard in very subtle and also very explicit ways. And
like what?
I mean, explicit ways, like we literally were called racial.
Yeah.
And then subtle, it's, I mean, one, feeling isolated just from the very fact that I'm very often either the only Black person or one of the only Black people in my classes or one of the only people of color in my classes. Subtle in the ways that, when people talk about like their experiences and stuff, or like there's a culture of like, oh yeah, like everyone's gone through these experiences, but they're talking about very white and very rich experiences that I've never had.
Yeah.
I remember in my sophomore fall, my sociology class, my professor had asked us, what's the first thing you do when you get pulled over by a cop? And my thought was, I'm going to press record. That's the first thing I'm going to do if I get pulled over by a cop.
Yeah.
And I also remember my sophomore year, I struggled a lot with like physical space. Like my physical space was just constantly being ignored, and I was constantly being bumped into, and like being in commons and literally being in front of the drink machine about to get a drink, and someone just like putting their hands across my body and pouring their own drink, even though I'm literally right in front of the drink machine about to pour myself a drink. Mm-hmm. I had to drop a class in my freshman spring because the way it was an international relations class, and the way that the global South was talked about was just horrible. And when I brought up that, capitalist companies are very exploitive of the global South, the professor looked me in my eye and was like, I don't think you can call it exploitation. And like, there was literally someone in the class who was like advocating for a return to colonialism and like mercantilism, and like letting Black and brown countries like not have control over their own economies and being run by European and American countries. So, it's just, yeah, it very early on, I realized that it was going to be much more of a struggle than I had anticipated. I mean, I had a high school teacher who went to Hamilton, and he warned me like, hey, like this is going to be a really tough experience. And so, there was part of me that knew like, okay, this was going to be a really tough experience, but it's very different. Like there's no way to actually prepare yourself for that. Mm-hmm. And it's a little bit corny. I don't know if you know the story of Posse, but the creator, Debbie Beale, founded it after she spoke to a student who said that like they probably would have stayed in college if they had their posse with them. That's where Posse comes from.
And tell me a little bit, and for those who are listening don't know what Posse is.
Yeah, so Posse is a leadership scholarship. So the way it works is there are 10 Posse cities, although that has been expanded a little bit because there's like a virtual Posse thing going on. But there are 10 like actual Posse cities with like offices and stuff, and each city is connected to a number of colleges, and those colleges are outside of that state, so you're guaranteed to go out of state if you're a Posse scholar. They're usually, I think all of the colleges are private institutions. I don't think there are any public institutions, and so the idea is to connect these schools with students in those cities who have great leadership potential. They have great grades. They have, pretty good SAT or ACT scores, but they might be overlooked by the traditional application process. And so it's a matter of like uplifting students who typically end up being marginalized to some degree, who might be overlooked by traditional college application processes. Mm-hmm. And the way it works is it's called a posse. And so it's 10 scholars per school that gets matched for each city. So my posse's only 9 because someone left, but so we were there, there were 10 of us in December of 2017 who got chosen to go to Hamilton. And Hamilton used to be a double posse. So we have Miami scholars and Boston scholars in May of 2018. So in my senior year of high school, they terminated the Posse Boston program. And so now they only bring in new Miami scholars. And when I graduate next year, there won't be any more Boston scholars.
What do they got against Boston?
That is something we've been trying to figure out for the last 2 years.
Okay.
Or I guess we're going on 3 years now.
Okay.
But like I was saying, it's a little bit corny in that, Posse started because of this whole I would have never left college if I didn't have my Posse. And that's very much what it is for me. The main reason why I decided not to transfer is because, as many of the critiques that I have of Hamilton, I think, the biggest thing that I have gotten from it are the relationships that I've created and the positive relationships that I've created. I absolutely love my Posse. Like I said, it's kind of corny to say, but I would not still be at Hamilton if it weren't for them. I think they're really, really great faculty. And with the exception of that one class that I had to drop, I've loved basically all of my classes. And I think the faculty are really great. I think other people that I've met, other friends that I've made are absolutely amazing. And they are 100% the reason why I am still at Hamilton.
Gotcha.
Because I carry those relationships very deeply in my heart. And they are worth staying at Hamilton despite everything that I have to go through and all the trauma that I have to go through.
So that was gonna be a follow-up question when you mentioned you had an unpleasant start to your time there and were looking to transfer. So I understand that it was your Posse that kept you there, but at some point there had to have been a decision made that not only am I going to stay, I'm going to work to make a positive impact on this campus, because it can be very easy for someone who has an unpleasant experience to start to be, at best apathetic, at worst even, I don't know what's worse than that, but to certainly not get involved. But yet here you are, the student assembly president and active in a number of organizations. So what was that? How did that mind shift happen of, okay, I'm going to stay and I'm going to throw myself into this place?
Yeah, it's definitely something that I go back and forth between, and there are definitely moments that I want nothing more than to just stop it. There are times where I do have to take a break from it. Like I said, I was on a leave of absence in my fall semester, and so I wasn't involved in any of the work that was going on because I needed that break and I needed to step away from it. Really, I think what it comes down to is just part of it is I find it very hard to stay silent about these things, especially because I see the way that they impact other people. Everything that I do is for my community and for the different communities that I hold deep in my heart. And so I just, when I think about specifically being in this position, I never would have imagined myself to be in student assembly. I've been asked multiple times and said no each and every time. And the reason why I finally said, okay, I'll do this is because I recognized that this was a way that I could maximize change at Hamilton, and that this was a way that I could better guarantee that other Black and Brown and queer and low income and whatever the case is, students at Hamilton have at least somewhat of a more positive experience than I did. And that's kind of what keeps me driving and what keeps me going is just knowing that my work is going to help someone. And I find it very difficult to step away when I am very consciously aware of the fact that if people aren't doing this work, then it means that people aren't being helped. And it means that people are just continuing to have really traumatic experiences. And I think another part is, I have developed beautiful and amazing connections in doing this work. And so I also recognize that a lot of the connections that I have right now that are keeping me at Hamilton would not exist if I wasn't doing this work. And so that's another thing that keeps me grounded and keeps me in doing what I'm doing, is knowing that this is also where I find community. And this is how as traumatic as it can be, it's also just how I sustain myself. And so I can't imagine stepping away from it for very long. I recognize that sometimes I need breaks, but I can't imagine ever like fully stepping away from it.
Well, good. It sounds like you're doing some good work, and your role as the student assembly president is how I first discovered you, in poking around on who from the Hamilton community should I talk to for this show. I uncovered this state of the union, state of the school, whatever that address was, state of the college. Thank you, state of the college. And I watched it and said, "Oh my God, this is highly critical of the administration and of the school in a good way, and in a way that you're doing." So, you mentioned being critical before, and that the school doesn't always take kindly to it. So I'm curious. When I talked to President Whitman for this show, he talked about that he meets regularly with the heads of the student assembly, and said he listens and takes your words into consideration. But hearing you speak and seeing some of the things you've written, it seems to portray a different picture, a different story. So talk to me about those interactions you have with President Whitman, because you are highly critical of the administration.
Yeah, I think there are many moving pieces that have many different impacts, and that overall lead to my understanding and belief, and many others' understanding and belief, that the administration doesn't actually listen to us. I think part of it comes from just personal experiences from before I was in this position, when I was trying to do that work. I think a very good example is when we first started asking for more information about why Posse Boston was terminated. We had been in multiple different meetings with members of the administration. And at one point, after, months of communication, I was asked why I was so angry about what was going on. And it was kind of a moment of like, I have literally been explicitly telling you why I am angry about this thing. And so part of it is just from like personal experiences of like literally having what I am saying questioned, and making it, having experiences that make it very explicit that this person wasn't listening to me when I was saying these things. And the other part of it is, I think that there is there's a very obvious power dynamic that occurs, in that students in particular, but I think also sometimes faculty and staff, what we say is kind of taken as like, oh yeah, like, sure, we'll come in and we'll quote unquote listen to what you have to say, but like none of that is actually implemented in any way, and none of that actually goes anywhere, and it feels very more like it's just a moment of trying to appease us.
You feel like it's checking a box.
Exactly. I think a really great example of that is when the Black and Latinx Student Union released their petition about the advisory council, calling for it to be abolished and for a new council to be created with more student and faculty representation. That got over 1,700 signatures, 700 of which were alumni, and to this day, the college president has not ever acknowledge those demands or acknowledge that petition in any like official capacity. So like over 1,700 voices have been completely ignored, that were, Hamilton community members have been completely ignored. When I reached out to the advisory council and wrote like 7 pages worth of writing, I got 3 paragraphs back that didn't address anything that I actually said. I was part of the petition around the advisory council over the summer when I was still co-chair of BLSU.
And just to interrupt you for 1 second, just to go back, the advisory council you have led, or you were part of, I assume you led it because I think you're leading everything. You led the response to that, and a separate organization that you felt was more representative. Yes, and this is what you're talking about.
Yeah, so I've been involved in the pushback against the advisory council since the start of it, because when it first started, I was the co-chair of the BLSU. So I was part of like BLSU's work, and then I transitioned into my student assembly position, and student assembly was also part of that work. And so I've stayed involved in the work, just with holding different capacities.
Got it.
there's a pattern, and this isn't, just me. Like, I know of other friends who are doing this work where the
Sure.
pattern is you send paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs of writing, or you ask very specific, very explicit questions, and nothing is actually answered. I think another great example is just, I think that's one. I think nothing is ever, I think when we bring up concerns, nothing is ever actually answered. I think the advisory council is the most recent example of that.
Mhm. And when
But
you meet with him, do you address these things directly with him, and how do those interactions go?
it still doesn't, they still don't get addressed.
Mm.
I think I recently met with him this week about the policy about lits that I sent to you, about this blanket policy that said that like emails and Zoom stuff, using student organization or using student or Hamilton resources, can't have anything to do with like religious or political causes. And I asked multiple times, what does political causes mean? Because that's a very blanket statement, and that can literally mean that like certain organizations just won't exist because everything that they do is political. And I just kept getting, oh yeah, like, well, the policy is going to be reviewed. And so they said, okay, while it's being reviewed, how is it going to be enforced? No answer. I asked if students were going to be part of that policy reviewing process. I was told no, that this was an administrative process. That's another thing, that like when students explicitly ask to be part of these processes, we are almost always denied. And the very few times that we are actually given space, first they have to be fought for. And I know from experience and from speaking to students who have been in those positions that they are very unheard in those positions, and everything that they say ends up just kind of being tossed aside and like never actually taken into consideration. And I think in those positions there's also a very clear power dynamic where like they are treated as if they're children and as if they don't know what they're talking about. I was in a meeting with the chairs of the Board of Trustees, and I was told that I don't know how the Board of Trustees works, that I don't know what I'm talking about when I bring up these concerns. I was told that recent, quote unquote, recent concerns about there not being enough student involvement in decision making is a very new concern that the Board of Trustees and the college president had never heard of, even though I know for a fact that these concerns have been expressed for years and years. I think there's just a constant, I think to bring it back to Posse, one of our demands has been that we want a written public statement about why Posse was cut. And we were just told, oh, that's not going to help you. That's not going to make you feel any better. And it's like, you can't tell me I'm telling you that this is going to make me feel better. I'm telling you that this is going to be helpful. Mm-hmm. And so it's just a constant dismissing of how we're feeling, constant kind of like non-answers when we ask very explicit and very direct questions. They're never actually addressed, or it's just kind of talked about broadly. Bring it back to the advisory council and the audit and action council. Whenever the audit and action council is brought up, I've only heard the college president say it, I think, once in a faculty meeting when a faculty asked about it. It has not been addressed or mentioned or acknowledged in writing at all. The go-to answer is that there are many groups on the campus that are doing work around racial justice, and people should get involved in as many groups as they want. So there's no acknowledgement of the work that we're doing. There's no acknowledgement of the critiques that are actually being made. When critiques are made, they are turned very personal. And it's kind of like, oh, like, you should have come spoken to me before you released this statement, or you should have come spoken to me before you went and spoke to this other person. Even though, there's a constant pattern of like, when we do come speak to you, our concerns aren't taken seriously. Mm-hmm. So why should we, go to you when we know for a fact that you're not going to take them seriously? We prefer to go to another person or to release a statement or something, because we know that that's going to have more of an impact, because we've had so many experiences of this not working.
Do you think being so public with a lot of your critiques and challenges and serving up lists of demands, as you mentioned, do you feel like it's a pushback and a retaliation against the public nature with which you're doing this? Or have you had to resort to that because the meetings you have in private don't result in any action?
It's
how does that work?
it's definitely because it hasn't resolved in those private meetings. I think a great example is, again, to bring it back to the initial BLSU's initial calls against the advisory council. I can no longer remember off the top of my head the official timeline of events, but when the advisory council was first announced and we saw that there weren't going to be student representatives on it, um, you know, BLSU was named as we'll work with BLSU to do racial justice work. And for some context, BLSU is very protective of its name because the way that it works is almost all decisions we bring members into those conversations. And so we would never make such a huge decision like working with a college president on these racial justice policies without first bringing it up to our membership. And so it had caused an issue for us because we had members then texting us like, hey, what is this thing about? We didn't hear anything about this, blah, blah, blah. And when we were getting that stuff, we brought it up in a private email to President Whitman that you could actually now see if you go on BLSU's Instagram, where we said, we explained, we're unhappy with the fact that you used our name without letting us know that you would be doing this. This sends a perception that we're working with you when we have not agreed in any capacity to do this. This is harming our relationship with our members. Also, we want to be part of the advisory council, but if we're going to be doing that, if we're going to be working with you, here are the preconditions that we need. Here are the things that need to happen before we can work with you. And that was basically ignored. And we got a 2-sentence response back from President Whitman. And so then after that, it was kind of okay, we're trying to work with you in this moment. And you were just not hearing us at all. And you were not engaging with us at all. So now we have to make this public because this is the only way that you're going to listen to us. And of course, even then, we weren't necessarily listened to, but at the very least, we knew that people knew what was going on. I think, that's kind of another aspect of it, right? Is we try to do our best to make sure that everyone is informative. I think that's a really big thing for me, and it's a really big thing for my administration is transparency. Because the college has a big issue with transparency. We actually recently got reaccredited by the Middle States Commission on Higher Education. And I spoke with some folks there. And so I explained, in my official capacity as SA president, I was like, the college has a really big issue with transparency. And in their recommendations to the college, they said that you need to be working on transparency. So it's not just me that recognize, it's not just myself and other students and faculty and staff that recognize hey, this college needs to work on transparency. But we also literally have a third party or, peer institution saying you need to be working on transparency. We had, I actually have a quote here from part of the advisory council hired Marta Esquilin to do some third-party reviews on racial justice at Hamilton. And in their final report, with regards to the advisory council and how it was created, it said that this third-party this third-party company, Esquilin Consulting, wrote, this lack of clarity left participants feeling powerless and unsupported and fueled their general impression that the college is more interested in symbolic, inclusive rhetoric and not in seriously addressing these issues. So it's not just us that are saying these things, right?
Yeah.
There are people that are disconnected from Hamilton that with just basic information about what's going on, recognize and see and understand there is an issue here. And so part of what we do is also trying to get out that information of hey, this is what's going on at Hamilton, because there aren't a lot of people that are trying to make that information as transparent as possible. And so we see it as part of our duty as, student representatives, both on student assembly and when we were, in the different organizations that we hold, we see it as our responsibility of in doing this work, we want to make sure that everyone is aware of what's actually going on. And so that's why we tend to make our things public of hey, people need to know what's going on, right? It's very hard to advocate for yourself if you can't even name what's happening or if you don't even know the background for everything. And so that's a huge part of our work is literally just giving people the information that they need to understand what's happening.
Do you feel like you're making progress? I mean, it seems like you're battling. You're fighting a lot of battles on a lot of fronts. Are you
Um,
making progress?
I think I understand it kind of as like institutional change and then like cultural change and how are we like directly impacting students.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with regards to directly impacting students, I think we are making progress. I think that students are really beginning to understand the ways that they are being systemically harmed by the institution. And that I have increasingly seen students stand less and less for that systemic harm. And I've increasingly seen students coming into their own power and being advocates for themselves, and sitting there, standing up and saying to the institution, like, hey, this is not okay. How you are treating us and how you are treating other community members is not okay, and this needs to change.
Mm-hmm.
And so I see that as a very big accomplishment. I mean, obviously, there's always more work to be done, and a lot of times what I've seen is I think sometimes it's difficult, obviously, to create like full unity, and usually you'll have like moments of really great unity, and then it kind of breaks up, and then you have moments of really great unity, and then it breaks up again.
Yeah.
But I think generally speaking, especially over the past year, specifically around mental health, there has been an increase in kind of student consciousness and understanding of like there are lots of issues at Hamilton that need to be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think more and more people are getting involved in doing that work. And I think with the Assembly in particular, over the last year, even before I came into this position, I think has been a significant increase in the Assembly being like a true advocacy body for students, and really prioritizing students above all else. I think the Assembly has done some really, really great work in the past year, and they're going to continue to do great work. So I think from like a student point of view and what students are doing, and also faculty and staff, are involved in all of this work. I think that's another great area that we're collaborating more with faculty and staff, because obviously, Hamilton isn't just for the students.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone is being impacted in different ways by everything that's going on. So yeah, I think that there's been a lot of progress on that end. I think on the institutional end, there is a significant amount of work to do. And my hope is as we, continue to make progress on the more community end of it, right? Like there's going to be increased pressure on the institution, and that institutional change is going to be a lot easier, not a lot easier, but it's more likely to happen because now it's not just like one or two or three or four people saying, hey, this thing needs to change. Now it's like over 1,700 people writing a petition and being like, hey, this thing needs to change. And if those 1,700 people all send an email to the college president or to the board of trustees or whatever the case is, like that can't be ignored.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, as we see an increase in student power and in faculty power and staff power, like we're going to see inevitably a change in the institution itself. At least that's the hope.
So it strikes me, if I go back to your comments around, you felt like it was going to be home. You had a gut feeling it was right. You got there and it wasn't what you had hoped early on. You were ready to leave. You've stayed and continue to struggle with a lot of things that happen and go on campus, but you're fighting like hell to make the change. So much so that you're even going to spend the majority of your senior year in the archives, uncovering the history of the school and shedding light on that, both positively and negatively. Student assembly president fighting to make positive change. You don't do those things if you don't care about the institution in your heart and wanting to make it a better place. So despite all the criticism and the frustrations you have, I still sense that this has to come from some place of love for Hamilton College. Am I right about that?
I think,
and I'm not trying to say like, oh, she loves Hamilton, it's all great. That's not what I'm fishing for.
no.
I'm actually generally curious, as someone who's been so critical and frustrated, to continue to do this and to say you're going to spend your senior year working on uncovering all these other things that have happened at the school. It's very easy to say like, to hell with this place, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Or I'm just going to ride out my time and then be done. But I don't sense that that's what you're doing.
No. I would say it's less of a love for Hamilton itself and more of a love for education. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm someone who really believes in open curriculums and in freedom in education. And the education system is something that I have been interested in since around my freshman year of high school is when I really started to get into it. And so a large part of what I do is more about thinking about what do I want higher education to look like? How is Hamilton achieving that? I think in its education, I think in its general academic curriculum, it's achieving that. How is it not achieving that? And what can I do to achieve that? How can I restructure Hamilton into the kind of educational institution that I would want to go to, that I would want my little sister to go to, that I would want my little brothers to go to, that I would want my friends to go to? I think that the US, but also just generally the world, has a really horrible relationship with education. And I think that there's so much good that can come out of education that has been taken advantage of and been intentionally reduced. And so I think, from an institutional level, that's a lot of why I do what I do, because I have so much love and appreciation and passion for education. And I understand education as something that can be powerful and impactful in very positive ways. And I want to see Hamilton be that kind of educational system, or educational institution. And then, again, like I said, when I think about my friends and I think about the professors that I love and I think about the people that are going to be coming after me, I want them to have more positive experiences. I want them to be able to experience an educational institution that really cares about them and really wants them to succeed and do well and be happy and healthy and secure and just okay. And unfortunately, that's not the Hamilton that we have right now. And I know how it's impacted me. I know how it's impacted my friends. And, I don't want that to be the case for future generations. I think one thing that just keeps playing in my mind, specifically about the pandemic, is I've been seeing a lot of videos and stuff of babies who were born during the pandemic, or who were born just right before the pandemic. And so now they're only starting to experience some level of normalcy, and they're only starting to interact with people. And I've been seeing about how with them being so isolated in their first few months of life or their first few years of life, that's going to impact them forever. And so when I think about, 20 years from now, when those kids are attending a college like Hamilton, Hamilton needs to be prepared to handle them and to handle what they're going to be going through, and to handle, all of the baggage and the trauma that they might have. The Hamilton that I know would not be able to handle that. And so what can I do to make it that 20 years down the line, Hamilton is more prepared to handle
what makes you say that? What are the things they're not equipped to handle that when that generation arrives?
I mean, I think one, and this has been an issue for a very long time, from my understanding, there just aren't enough resources that are given to the counseling center. There aren't enough therapists and psychiatrists. And from my understanding, I haven't interacted with David Walden, who's the director, personally, but I know that he, tries his best to give as much as he can and to help as much as he can. But at the end of the day, it's about resources. And the college does not put enough resources into that. And so I know that it's very difficult to get genuine help from the counseling center, in ways that truly help you. So, it's not on a very just literal basic level. The counseling center is not equipped to handle the amount of students who need support. And that's a matter of resources. The counseling center just needs more resources. It's a matter of cultural shifts. One thing that my administration is going to be looking into is how are we working with admissions to ensure that we don't have really racist people coming to college. Because if there are a bunch of really racist people at Hamilton, then that's going to have a significantly negative experience or impact on the experiences of the Black and Brown students who come here.
And you think there are a lot of racist students there now?
I think that there are ones. Yeah. I think based on, articles I've seen written, based on things that my friends have experienced in very recent years. and months. I think just based on like things that I've heard in class or that other friends have heard in class, like there are races at Hamilton. And like that needs to change, obviously. I think another aspect of the cultural shift, that's something that I've been speaking about with the assembly recently is, Hamilton is an academically rigorous school, which is great. It's why a lot of us go there. But there's a level of academic rigor and focus on academics that becomes harmful. And so part of it is also like, we need to change the culture and expectation around what it means to be a quote unquote good student. And like, there's all this talk about like, oh, like self-care, like take care of yourself. But like, what are we actually doing to encourage students to take care of themselves, both on like, what is our messaging looking like, but also like, how are we literally building in structures within the academic curriculum that allows students to actually take care of themselves? I think that's a really big thing. I think, there's so many studies being done about this, about, the way that my generation and the folks that are younger than me, have so much anxiety and stress and around academics.
Yes.
And that's a real issue. And like, I know for myself, like part of my experience in the last year has been trying to unlearn that and trying to like recognize that like my health comes above my grades. And that's a really tough thing to do. And I can't do it without the support that I'm getting in that.
Well, I've asked the question of when this topic has come up on this show before and talking to faculty members or recent graduates, it's a simple question and it sounds like I'm being flippant and I'm not, and I ask you are students having fun? There's an element of college that's supposed to be fun, but it feels like that can get lost in the pressures you're talking about. And I don't mean go party your face off and be an idiot, although maybe that could be fun for some people too. But I just mean in general, can you take a break, as you said, and enjoy yourself a little bit?
This is something that I've had some conversations with one of my friends. And I think my answer is no. I don't think people are having fun. I think people are, there have been there have been more reports coming out recently about like, oh, Hamilton students drink a lot more than their peer institutions and Hamilton students smoke a lot more than their peer institutions. And I think that, we need to have a serious conversation about like, people are smoking and drinking so much, partly because like culturally, like that's what's expected to like have fun, but also because like, they don't know what to do with themselves. Like, I think to some, like, I'm just thinking about like my own experiences and my own, and speaking with friends and stuff and with other students. I think part of it is kind of like, yeah, let's just go and like get drunk and get high and party because at least it's something to do. And I don't think that many people actually enjoy doing that. And I think that they're doing it partly out of just expectation because, oh, you're a college student, this is what you do. And partly because it's just the easiest way to have quote unquote fun. But I don't think people are actually having fun. And I know during the week, people definitely aren't having fun. People are definitely like, I think people are very much just going through the motions and just kind of going through college and not really experiencing and living. Obviously that's not, every single person's experience.
Sure.
And there might be students who are genuinely having fun, but I don't think that that's the case.
Is that an area you're looking into or looking at all as part of your administration? I know that's more of a student activities responsibility and res life and so forth, but
I think there's so much that goes into it. I think a large part of I think it's a little bit less about like, there aren't literally things to do. Like I work with student activities and I know that, the programming team and the event staff, especially in a normal year, like there are a lot of events that happen on campus. I think it's more like people are so constantly bogged down by their academics that like you can't escape it. So there is there's never like taking a break from academics, especially right now. I mean, we got 2 wellness days this semester and 1 last semester. There were no breaks. was just constantly doing work
Mm.
all the time. And so even during those wellness days, like even if you like, the last wellness day that we had, I took an actual wellness day, didn't do any work, but the entire time that I wasn't doing any work, I was thinking about the work that I had to do. There's never any escaping of it. Maybe for a couple of hours, when you're drunk out of your mind, you can escape from it. But once the day has started again, like there is no escaping it. So like that's why I think it's very much part of it is very much a cultural and societal thing that makes it very difficult. And not so much, there's literally, I realized earlier I said, there's nothing to do, but that's not necessarily the case. It's more that there's nothing to do to actually like take your mind off.
To unplug, unwind, get away. Got it.
Right.
Got it. So as you look back on I usually ask this question of people who went to school and then have, had 10, 15 year careers, but I'm still curious, given the sort of the journey you've taken of your 3 years, almost 3 years there, as you think back to your arrival on campus, anything you wish you had known?
I think I'd wish just kind of, I guess, on the mindset of like taking breaks from academics. I think I wish I had started to separate myself from being a student and only a student earlier on. It's very difficult to do that, but I think in the past year that I've been doing that, it's been very beneficial. And I think part of that is also like taking more advantage and advocating for more educational experiences that are based within experience and leadership. I think one thing that Hamilton could really benefit for, I think, is having more opportunities for students to gain their education and gain their learning from like actually going out and doing things. I did an independent study this semester. And that was really great. That was an opportunity for me to like actually like build what my class is going to look like. One of the reasons why I'm so excited for the senior fellowship is because I am going out and like getting research experience and using that as part of my academic experience and my academic journey. So I think also like I would have told myself to take more advantage of the opportunities that do exist. And I think advocate for like more opportunities to be created. So I realize might be a little bit contradictory. Be less of a student, but do more. I guess for me, it's like focus less on like traditional academics and do more of like, again, I very much believe in students taking their own initiative with their educational journeys. And I wish that I was practicing that more.
All right, that's Saphire Ruiz, the current Student Assembly president. If you're interested in reading more about some of the work that Saphire's been doing as Student Assembly president, there'll be some links in the show notes to this episode for some further reading. I'll be very interested to see what comes of the research Saphire is doing into the history of activism on campus. Sounds like a really interesting project. And my thanks to Saphire for joining this week. I enjoyed our conversation. You have been listening to Had I Known on WHCL-FM, Clinton, New York. HadIKnown.buzzsprout.com. Had I Known Show on social media. As always, my thanks to Dr. Michael Woods for supplying the music on the show. And once again, Doc is going to play us out. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll talk to you next week.
thine own podcast show on your radio or take it to go.